Got a lot of lessons left to learn, but I'm not even close.
The Urantia Book continuously reminds us that primitive man was obsessed with spirits and debts that must be repaid to other worldly sources. It was this very notion of death being viewed as a punishment for some unknown offense against deity that led to the original sin concept as an attempt to explain the arduous toils of such things like age-related decline, disease, pain experienced during childbirth, and of course, weeks of little to no food. Consequently, we have developed many variations of the Adam and Eve story, consisting of some original sin that must be suffered by their progeny for the sins of their ancestral father. It was this original concept of suffering that led to self-denial cults of self-chastisement, sacrifice, and fasting rituals that led primitive man towards seeking communion with their vengeful God. Even so, today, do we see fasting and priesthood denials associated with forbidding sexual congress and at times the nourishment necessary to foster proper human advancement and development. If God did not want us to eat, there would be no food. If God wanted us not to procreate, then there would be no sexual reproduction. If God did not want us to subject ourselves to this material existence, then we would have no material bodies that need such nourishment and reproduction. With respect to half-truths, the Urantia Book teaches us that self-denial can be a form of spiritual growth if applied correctly and not being a barrier to other forms of spiritual advancement, such as the blessings of intimate relationships and, of course, parenthood. After all, if we did not have spiritual needs, then it is likely that you would not be watching this very video. If we did not have sexual needs, then it would be likely that the culture of the opposite gender might be aversive to some individuals, never revealing the dual nature of humanity. If we did not have a stable family unit, then it would be likely that we would be inept when it comes to intimacy and putting someone else ahead of our own selves. In the Urantia text, monogamy is viewed as an advantageous self-denial due to the micro-government of family. It is written in 89.3.7 that
someday man should learn how to enjoy liberty without license, nourishment without gluttony, and pleasure without debauchery. Self-control is a better human policy of behavior regulation than is extreme self-denial. Nor did Jesus ever teach these unreasonable views to his followers.
In fact, it indicates in paper 89 that the Apostle Paul was well aware of the problems associated with self-denial, despite their participation in a continence cult of self-deprivation that later inspired such potentially destructive church activities. An excerpt from 89.3.6 indicates,
the Apostle Paul was a devotee of this cult, and his personal views are reflected in the teachings which he fastened onto Christian theology. It is good for man not to touch a woman. I would that all men were even as I myself. I say, therefore, to the unmarried and widows, it is good for them to abide even as I. Paul well knew that such teachings were not a part of Jesus' gospel, and his acknowledgement of this is illustrated by his statement, I speak this by permission and not by commandment. But this cult led Paul to look down upon women, and the pity of it all is that his personal opinions have long influenced the teachings of a great world religion. If the advice of the tent-maker teacher would be literally and universally obeyed, then would the human race come to a sudden and inglorious end.
Despite Paul most certainly being one of Christ Michael's apostles, like Moses, the man in Paul was consistently striving towards bridging present-day beliefs with their enhanced religion, whilst also attempting to succumb to popular opinion. Hence the grievous practices with religious officials of today not necessarily following an important aspect of father or motherhood ministries that is essential towards understanding the parental love of God. Consequently, Mother Superior, if you accept the term, would be truly superior if they participated in the godly act of creation and cultivation of life, often overlooked or even discouraged by religious doctrines. Like stated in previous videos, the universe makes up for this lack of experiential knowledge by offering such experiences on the first Urantia planet that some individuals have to go to after this existence. Understanding sin. In modern psychology, we view social deviance on a spectrum. If you go to a store and notice that an item has been priced incorrectly, your state laws may indicate that you have the right to purchase that item for the incorrect listed price. That may be in your favor. However, if this was a small business, or even better, you were friends with the owner of said small business, would you do the right thing by paying the correct amount? This example breeds the statement that just because something is legal does not make it righteous or moral, or even conversely, a sin. In passage 89:10.2, we learn that
sin must be redefined as deliberate disloyalty to deity.
Plain and simple. This means that despite it being arguable whether the customer was doing the wrong thing in the previous scenario, if they accepted the false price that hurt the business owner, that this inward practice can be seen as a simple error in development and not necessarily a sin. Conscious, continuous disloyalty is required for there to be an actual, irrevocable sin. Going against social mores, laws, or individual attitudes is simply an error of development or choice which may lead to sin, but is not sin in its own right. As an example, cultures that were taught that human sacrifice was important to satiate the gods did so out of respect for their deity, with no knowledge or foresight into finding their own way out of this practice. Contrastingly, when it comes to Lucifer, he is often depicted as truly internalizing their inwardness and self-importance, knowingly defying their creator, and understanding the true costs to humanity and of such an offense against God. Hence the term being morally bankrupt, to describe many of the self-deprecating actions of lonesome isolation, condescending debauchery, spiritual stagnation, and flamboyant egoism that led Lucifer away from God. After all, the mark of the beast is described in the Urantia text as not being a 3-digit number, but rather our default beastly attributes we're meant to overcome and understand. Every flinch of intolerance, instances of failing to think of the needs of others through ease-seeking, and due to such skewed perspective, truly believing your way is the right and only way, can be animalistic in nature. In the Urantia Book, we learn that feeling shame or guilt is an important badge associated with an ascendant potentiality. It is through a simple sense that we can always do better that jumpstarts our own ascendant career towards striving for perfection. A sense of unworthiness is both accurate starting point and important striving towards better ideals such as moral nobility, cosmic insight, and spiritual living. Despite our universal Father not being a respecter of persons, eternal life can only be achieved through divine action and intent, and it has yet to be determined if true individuality is to be prized by God the Supreme. After all, like stated in earlier videos, it is the intent in which we conduct ourselves in which we are judged, and not the action itself. In 89:10.5, we learn that
The confession of sin is a manful repudiation of disloyalty, but it in no wise mitigates the time-space consequences of such disloyalty. But confession, sincere recognition of the nature of sin, is essential to religious growth and spiritual progress.
in a nutshell, sinning against God seeks no retribution from God. However, sinning against God inherently pulls you away from having a relationship with God. Having a relationship with God is the only path to spiritual survival. Sin and sacrifice. Beyond mere wrongdoing, sin reflects a complex interaction of personal intent, societal influence, and cosmic reality. It encompasses deliberate acts, neglect of duty, and even unconscious patterns that manifest in harmful behaviors. While sin implies a moral failing with spiritual consequences, error denotes a lack of understanding or knowledge of experience. This distinction suggests that many sins may arise from ignorance rather than malicious intent, calling for compassion rather than condemnation. The concept of sin can be viewed through the lens of developmental psychology, suggesting that one's understanding of moral choices evolves with experience and spiritual maturity. For example, what one may view as a sin at one stage of life may be perceived as a stepping stone as one gains cosmic experiential wisdom. Psychologically, the experience of the aforementioned guilt can serve as a motivator for personal growth, leading individuals to reassess their actions and strive for improvement. Healthy guilt can prompt constructive change, while excessive guilt may lead to spiritual paralysis. This guilt can lead to misperceived debt, in which the term sacrifice is most associated with. The word sacrifice comes from the origins in Latin of sacrificum, meaning to make sacred. This implies that sacrifices are not only acts of loss, but also acts that elevate and sanctify the self or the community. Atonement signifies the restoration of a broken relationship and can be viewed as a type of sacrifice. Nowadays, most atonement actions are not merely through punitive measures, but through love, understanding, and forgiveness. This aligns with psychological concepts of reconciliation in human relationships. The Urantia Book teaches us that atonement is not about seeking God's favor, but by acting godly that realigns yourself with your original purpose and vibrational state. Remember that mercy is always associated with a forecast of hope, associated with an offender. If someone continues offending, the more right they feel about that offense. And of course, eventually, over the long haul, that likely will polarize them to stagnate their own spiritual development. Consequently, there will be no mercy in this instance, since change will become increasingly far more difficult as they start doubling down, so to speak. Conclusion. The concepts of sin, sacrifice, and atonement form a profound framework for understanding human experience and its relationship with the divine. By exploring these themes in great detail, we gain insight into how personal and collective experiences shape our spiritual journeys, emphasizing the importance of reflection, growth, and interconnectedness in pursuing a more meaningful life. This exploration invites individuals and communities to engage deeply with their choices, fostering an environment of healing, understanding, and ultimately, spiritual evolution. The Urantia Book teaches us that to sin, it will always be a conscious choice, which can be forecasted by errors in one's life that can become cyclical. However, such a forecast is most certainly reversible, which can lead to further spiritual growth if applied appropriately. The real action of sin is ultimately destructive to the human soul, fostering a rift between such a person and, of course, God. However, sin is not a constant state, and as long as such a sin remains a transient action, such a lesson can lead to more self-development and conscious choices towards further choosing to do the will of God and to become godly themselves. It's when a person starts internalizing that their sin is the right and only choice, does such a path begin leading such a person towards moral bankruptcy, which is incompatible with coming closer to God, and of course, eternal salvation.